All right, everybody. You all remember a few years ago when I had my first big drama, right? The sex cult drama. For those of you guys that don't know, that accusation, the false accusation that I had a sex cult of all things, I am not that cool, I promise, came from a single person. That person is a YouTuber by the name of ThoughtSlime, who to this day still doubles down on this accusation and refuses to apologize. They will block anybody who asks them to apologize to me or correct their statements on me, and they will, double down on it on Twitter if it's somebody big enough that they need to respond to because they're getting a lot of likes and replies. ThoughtSlime is a genuinely slimy individual. However, recently they made a video called An Apology to Men and Response to Shoe0nHead, which is just like, if you guys don't know, Shoe0nHead called me a pedo sympathizer for saying, hey, starting the conspiracy theory that Balenciaga is a pedophile ring is probably not good, especially when, like, we're at the start of what would end up being the massive gay groomer, shit. That ended up being a huge hysteria across all of America, resulting in countless anti-LGBT bills getting passed. Yeah, basically that was how the Shoe0nHead bridge got burnt. So, seeing these two fight is like, well, it's gonna be funny as fuck. It's gonna be super funny. Obviously, we're not gonna watch the whole thing because, ThoughtSlime is such a, spiteful little shit. He would, actually, unironically, copyright strike me falsely if I included too much of their video in my video, so we're gonna have to be sparing with how much of their video we use. But I'm curious to see what this is all about.
This is the hardest video I've ever had to make. I never thought I'd have to make a video like this, but it has come to my attention that I have failed men. For those not familiar, men are like, how do I describe them? They're like normal people, but usually they're bigger, and usually they're hairier, and they don't typically smell as good. It's hard to describe them because they're quite variable. Some of them are Chinese, some of them are dentists. They're all different. You know one when you see one. But it's not important what men are. What's important is that it's been brought to my attention that some of my words have been deeply offensive to
there are a lot of adjectives you can put before man. That is true.
Men and people within the larger male fandom. And that was never my intention. I would never want to mock people who I think could defeat me in a fight. Besides, some of my best friends are men. I have men in my family. I'm even half man on my father's side. I have a deep and abiding respect for men and men.
Okay, so we're already demonstrating this, very clear sarcasm in, reference to the insistence. Okay. So, Shoe0nHead is obviously wrong, and ThoughtSlime is obviously wrong. Both of them are wrong, and they're wrong for different reasons. I can prove it mathematically. So, basically, right now, we are seeing record high rates of loneliness among Gen Z. Where we are seeing this loneliness the most strongly is in Gen Z men. Men around my age, around most of the people in chat's age, right? Our generation, but the dudes, you know? In that reference, we are the most lonely as a demographic as we have ever been. Data has shown this time and time again when it comes to friendships, relationships, so on and so on. This is just objectively true. Now, a lot of lefties have tried to just hand-wave this by saying it's the pandemic, and that the pandemic makes it, has made it a lot harder for people to socialize, and that's where the problem is. And I do think the pandemic has been a multiplying factor, but overall, there's been a pattern. This pattern has been going for a while, and it's not letting up anytime soon by the looks of things. It's just continuing this direction. And the stat that was the most shocking is the extremely high rate of virginity among 18-year-old to 25-year-old men. Now, this is a complicated topic because there's a few ways to look at it, right? On one hand, no one is owed losing their virginity, right? And certainly at 18 years old, you're not, too old to have not had sex. You're not even too old to have not had sex at 25, right? You can just never have sex if you want to. But one issue is that I think a lot, sex is fun. Let's be real. It is one of the great joys of life, and a life completely lacking in it is definitely pretty... That is a pretty sucky life. Can we all agree on that? I think everybody, pretty much everybody here can agree. So when you look at a statistic that shows that a massively disproportionate amount of young men are still virgins well into adulthood compared to women their age, that tells you there's something going on with specifically young men that is unique. Now, of course, they're not owed this, but I think it's worth looking at why this is happening, especially when we look at the results of this statistic. Where do you think the incel movement came from? Like, the incel movement was a thing a few years ago, and was a thing 10 years ago even, but it was never as big as it is now. With Andrew Tate and Sneeko and Aiden Ross and the Red Pill community where they are now, it has never been bigger than it is now. So clearly, there is a growing market for that content. A continuously growing market for that type of narrative. And the fact that that is where these guys are going to be radicalized in a really bad place should be concerning to us. We should be curious about what sociological roots are causing these statistical changes that are causing young men to rally themselves to far-right talking heads. The fact is that our society teaches men from like a ridiculously young age that our value comes from a few things, okay? There are three primary things that a man's value in society can come from. If you do not provide at least one of these three things, you are practically a nothing man, a useless man, a joke, a failure of a man, if anything, right? All of our media and everything like heavily implies or outright tells you this your entire life when you're a dude. In the same way that beauty standards and sexist, misogynistic, standards and whatnot are applied to women from a very young age and until like through their entire life as they grow up. And for men, the idea is that you have to be valuable for one of these three reasons. Either you have to provide financial stability, you have to be capable of providing physical and sexual satisfaction, so like being a heartthrob, right? Or you have to be like a really good protector. Like you have to give off the vibe of a really good protector that fills like a very particular set of needs, right? Or you have to be willing to die in war. That's also like the fourth little like that's the side optional one. That's like the like, you know how Y is sometimes a vowel? It's like that. That's also an option. That you get that thrown in your face sometimes too, that like a man has to be willing to die for what he believes in, you know, that kind of shit. And so a lot of dudes grow up in this era where like we're all on the internet. We have everything we need besides like the fact we're working wage slave jobs. Outside of that, like there's no going out there and trying harder to make your life better in most cases, right? Like the idealized view that I think a lot of men had growing up in America in particular is that we live in a meritocracy and I'm a man. If I work hard and I do what men are supposed to do, then I will see the rewards that men are promised for doing what they're supposed to do. And the reality is that that's all just the bare minimum. like unironically, a lot of that is just the bare minimum. Being able to make enough money to survive, working hard, working a job, in many cases being willing to enlist in the military and die for your country. For many people, this is the bare minimum, not what they have to do in order to live like a good life. The fact is, the American dream is kind of being revealed as the American myth to much of Gen Z, and particularly to younger men. Because, well, while we are seeing record numbers of women pursuing STEM fields and long-term careers, as ever, women are generally socially moved into finding men to support them, while men are pushed heavily into finding a career that will make them desirable to a woman looking for a man to support them. And so right now, men are suffering probably the most from the state of like economic anxieties in the working class of like Gen Z. And that's probably one of the larger factors in this, that a lot of like younger men are working jobs that are taking up a lot of their time, or they're in school and that's taking up a lot of their time. And a lot of younger women their age are dating guys that are working those jobs. It's complicated. And I think the fact that we're like, I'm not trying to say that women have it easy in Gen Z, but the fact that men are showing like the symptoms more strongly, so much more strongly, of social anxiety and social isolation, says that like either men are naturally incapable of handling hardship, or in some particular way, men are getting it pretty bad. Right? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we spend so much time training men into thinking that there's a very select few things that they have to be a real man. And those standards are practically impossible. And they get more impossible day by day. And one of the biggest, of course, is the idea of, you know, having a relationship with a woman and pleasing her, right? And a lot of those, and that can depend on a lot of things just based on where you are. Like, obviously, if you're dealing with social anxiety, that's not going to help very much. And so it can be cyclical, right? If you don't feel like you can get into a good relationship with a girl, you're going to feel like you can't get a good job because you're depressed about it. And if you can't get a good job, you're going to feel like you can't get a good relationship with a girl. So it's like these things feed into each other, and they're all toxic standards that aren't really there. Like, they aren't really there. Most of these guys are literally too like in their head about it. But like, I'm honestly painting with too broad of a brush right now. I know I've paused for so long, but I'm actually passionate about this topic because it's so important. I'm honestly painting with too broad of a brush because a lot of younger men my age aren't in the like aren't part of that statistic because they can't get laid or they can't get a girlfriend, but they unironically choose not to. Hypers in chat, if you're unfamiliar with the term volcel, is it's basically voluntarily celibate as opposed to involuntarily celibate, which is incel, right? The idea is that they voluntarily do not pursue sex, relationships, or anything like that. And most guys that I know that are in the demographic of 18 to 25, all of them meme and joke about being volcel, including me. Like, every one of them jokes about being, like, in a not-so-joking way, jokes about being volcel. A lot of content that we consume online right now is some of the most vapid, mind-numbing bullshit ever. When it comes to TikTok in particular, I think that TikTok has ruined the perception of women to young men. When I go on TikTok or I see any TikTok trend, it's like, here's a girl lip syncing to a popular song that's about abusing your boyfriend and manipulating him to get things out of him. And it's like 100,000 different women lip syncing to that song to like 1 million likes each. When dudes see that kind of stuff, they just start to grow this like resentment, this disgust for women, an unironic disgust for women. And I've talked to a lot of guys my age who simply say, I feel like a lot of women are predators, just a different kind of predator than a lot of men tend to be. The fact is, a lot of these guys, included in this statistic, are afraid of women. They are actually just straight up afraid of women, and they've like rationalized their fear using anecdotal examples where, like, insert woman did a bad thing, or insert, like, toxic thing that's popular with women right now is popular, right? Dating apps are a good example of this as well. A lot of the most popular incel statistics come from dating apps, right? But you're selecting for, like, the worst possible people to try to base your opinion off here, but the existence of that doesn't matter. A lot of people will never listen to you when you say, but dating apps are not a good, like, they're not a good population to select from, right? They're not unbiased. But when you look at dating apps, like what is it? The top 10% of guys or 80% of women will only ever swipe right on 10% of guys. And so they extrapolate that to all of the dating world, and tons of guys my age believe that's real, which is really disheartening when it's just a blatantly unfactual statement. But when you see stuff like that, when you see those statistics, and it's at least true on dating apps, those anecdotes start to form worldviews in illogical young people's minds. Young people think that what they experience is how things are, right? It's hard to put into words, but young people, like, once they're, like, in their, like, late teens, early 20s, start to feel like they've got everything figured out. I'm 24 right now, and I already feel like my 20-year-old self was dumb as fuck. You know, like, I already think my 20-year-old self was super dumb compared to my 24-year-old self, you know? And it's just sad that so many people on the left are unwilling to even discuss this stuff, because it's such a... I feel like the popular thing is just to say, boo-hoo, man, like, why don't you men just man up? And it's like, well, now you're part of the problem. When you're unwilling to, like, hear out why these dudes are like, having a massive sociological issue across the entire demographic, you're just kind of doing the bad thing. You're just kind of doing the patriarchy when you tell them to just man up and deal with it. Like, yeah.
Male culture. I've participated in many of their rituals, gone to their places of worship, ate their traditional foods. I will now give the traditional male apology for any offense.
Bouth, are we watching Game of Thrones tonight? I want to watch Game of Thrones tonight. So if you watch Game of Thrones tonight, you better wait for me, and you better get me in there, because I'm down for some GOT. I'm down.
It's my thoughtless words may have caused. I'm sorry, bro. I love you, bro. Be good, bro. Now to back up and explain myself a little bit, in a video...
Jesus Christ, I forgot how obnoxious and slimy ThoughtSlime is. Oh my lord. Can we fast forward to... Oh god, I... Do I have to look at ThoughtSlime, guys? Can I, like, close my eyes? Can I just close my eyes the entire time?
Facts about the reproduction of patriarchy could be taken as evidence of a supposed demonization of men and manhood. Particularly because the whole fucking video, like the whole fucking thing, was about how insincere this type of performative masculinity is, how it does not represent men realistically, and holds them to standards that are both impossible and, this is important, deeply stupid. But then, some very concerned people reached out with some gentle criticism, some suggestions, like that I should kill myself, more people than the normal amount that tell me to kill myself, and a lot of people complaining that I hate men, and also for some reason...
Yeah, so basically, that's not at all what happened. What ThoughtSlime did is over Twitter and over his YouTube channel and other platforms over the last, like, year that this has been a relevant topic of discussion online in the lefty space, has been discrediting any claim that we should give a fuck about this statistical spike of insanity in male virginity between the ages of 18 and 25. Getting laid as a straight dude often requires free time. That's definitely true as well. I think that a lot of... This is also why it's so frustrating to me that lefties won't talk about it, is that this is such a great bouncing off point to talk about the ills of capitalism and living in a, like, late capitalist society. The fact that so many young men don't have enough free time to feel as though they have the time to invest into a potential relationship is, like, such a huge point. It's such a huge point for us on our side of things. The incel red pill types just say it's because women suck.
Reason white people, which I don't feel is related, but okay, I'll work on that too, I guess. And I didn't want to admit it at the time. I thought, you know, what's probably happened here is that some chud must have talked about me in a video. Like, some chud didn't like a thing I said, and they showed it to their chud audience to get them mad at me about it. But what happened next shook me to my core. Because it turns out it wasn't a chud that talked about me in a video. It was Shoe0nHead. But what? Well, she didn't really talk about me so much as she showed, like, a clip of me in passing in a video. And that was why suddenly my feed sucked more for a little while until they got bored. And it confused me. It confused my delicate little brain. Huh? I would understand if some chud made a video about me, but Shoe0nHead is, of course, no right-wing culture warrior. Now, I'll grant you, she once was. She was once an anti-feminist crusader in the...
Well, she definitely is now. Also, Jesus fucking Christ. Who remembers this guy's fucking psycho art? His fucking nightmare fuel art. What's his name? Brent Sherry. Yeah, this was, yeah.
meme wars. She rubbed shoulders and hobnobbed with all sorts of anti-SJW alt-right adjacent figureheads and white supremacist terrorists back then, but in time, the scales fell from her eyes like Paul on the road to Damascus. And now she's a bona fide, real, honest-to-God, no-fooling leftist. She said so. Of course, those old videos are still there. You know, she's not running from her past. And
she also just married a neo-Nazi.
And of course, they're still monetized. Like, she's still benefiting from her past. But when people come to our side, it's cause for celebration. They should be welcomed and given leadership positions. That's called solidarity. People can change. People can change without meaningfully changing their behavior. And at the time, I was too busy to respond because, of course, I was working on a video about fake leftists disingenuously calling for left unity in order to use our spaces to spread their right-leaning, often bigoted ideas. So, of course, you see, I had no time to think about Shoe0nHead. No, I'm doing it again. I'm being snide. I mustn't be snide. Being snide is what got me into this mess. Look, I can't see inside Shoe0nHead's heart. If I were forced to guess, I'd imagine her conversion, so to speak, is
America isn't Jeff Bezos. Also, why did this motherfucker just FBI crime statistics at me? Men do the most murder. Okay?
Sorry, Shu, I should have been clearer about this. I was talking about who has power over who in the scenario. You probably didn't realize that because it was in the part of the video that you skipped, but generally, when you're willing to kill someone, that grants you a certain power over them. Kind of thought that didn't need clarifying, but there you go. That's why I threw that statistic in there. They like having all of the stuff they don't deserve. They like that. They want it to stay that way because it suits them. Because of the stuff, telling people they're special and deserve all the nice shit that they have, that's going to be an easier sell 10 times out of 10 than like saying, hey, maybe you should have less stuff and other people should have more.
Leftism is when you don't have a lot of stuff.
No, I don't think leftism is about having less stuff. I do think it is about flattening unjust power dynamics.
The crazy thing is they're both so far off base. They aren't even, like, approximate to the conversation at hand. Why... The conversation, if we're actually having a healthy, good conversation about this, should be about how feminist rhetoric needs to include more points about how the patriarchy harms men too. Because we kind of have had this, like, brain-poisoned idea that feminism is just for women become popular in our society. That's not the case at all. The reason why feminism has the name that it does is because of the roots of the movement. But feminism is through and through an egalitarian movement. Its goal is to defeat injustices and to achieve equality between, like, genders. That is the goal of feminism. If men are having a bad time in a certain issue due to especially the patriarchy, the thing that feminism is primarily meant to be fighting as a movement, then I think we need to talk about how it affects men too. And I don't think it's like, oh, it only matters because it affects men too, duh. But I think it's relevant, right? It's relevant to let men know that feminists aren't just like crazy screeching women fighting to get more rights than men, or whatever popular culture might have convinced them.
And kind of dismantling oppressive power structures. And so if one group is systematically denied stuff, then yeah, taking stuff from the people denying it and giving it to them is indeed leftist. Kind of thought that went without saying, kind of thought that was self-evident. If one were to simply watch her video, which approximately 3 million people did, they'd get the impression that I was saying that the left should not do outreach to men because men are murderers and evil. When in fact, what I actually said was the left, by virtue of the positions we hold, will always have a harder time converting those who benefit from the structures we seek to dismantle, a position she herself states in the same video.
But the fact is, it's hard for progressives to organically appeal to men, because a large part of progressivism is oppressive hierarchy, and men are oppressors. Making progressivism look appealing to young men is an uphill battle from the start.
And thus the question of whether...
That's actually the most misandrist argument I've ever heard from Shoe0nHead. Holy shit. Young men will see progressivism and that it wants to make hierarchy not exist, and they will see that it wants to make women equal to men, but that requires men to be brought down, supposedly. And so that makes it an uphill battle for men to become feminists? Get your heads out of the gutter, chat.
Whether or not the left does enough to appeal to men is misguided. It's harder for the left to do that, kind of intrinsically. My points about men doing most of the murdering and assaulting, which is just a statistical reality, was not brought up, as Shu presents it here, as evidence that the left need not appeal to men. I brought it up many sentences later to demonstrate the relative power dynamics between men and not men. But she kind of just splices those two things together, and it gives the impression I'm simply dismissing men's concerns out of pocket. She hilariously had to skip past a part where I specifically say that there are, of course, exceptions to the general rule that men are more privileged than, say, women. Because if she didn't, it would become clear that her entire framing of this issue is kind of horseshit. Because of course men have mental health problems, and of course those mental health problems are important and worth taking seriously. The only people she seems to be able to point to say otherwise is like weird Twitter randos, given that she likes to
That is true. That is true. Like, her alternative is red pill shit. Like, very, like, soft, middling, inoffensive tier red pill shit. Like, basically the modern day, like, version of what she did back in 2016. Like, just, like, a reiteration of it for modern politics. So, yeah. I definitely agree with some of ThoughtSlime's criticisms of Shoe. But at the same time, ThoughtSlime is not, like, Shoe wasn't even arguing from a basis of reality in the first place. So ThoughtSlime's responses aren't even, aren't even two arguments that are based in reality. So a lot of this is just, like, they're talking past each other, and neither of them are actually touching on the real issue, it feels, I mean, at least it feels like it. I actually haven't seen Shoe's original video. I haven't watched a Shoe0nHead video since me and her were friends. Like, since way before me and her stopped being friends, honestly. I hadn't watched any of her content for a while, like, up until that. So, yeah, I don't know if she, like, is more on topic later on in the video or something, but it's called The Loneliness Epidemic.
Let's say, embellish the contents of some people's tweets, I don't find that argument necessarily persuasive. Saying that someone has privilege, or even indeed that they actively enforce a structure which privileges them, doesn't mean that, like, we ought to never ever listen to them or help them with anything ever. If I were on fire, I would expect a less privileged person who is holding a fire extinguisher to help me. She also seems to be missing the broader critique people are making. I think that she's absolutely right, for example, to point out that it's kind of rude and shitty to respond to a man having a mental health crisis by simply saying that mental health crisis is the result of patriarchy. I don't think it's fair to lay patriarchy at the feet of an individual man, and I don't think it's helpful to dismiss someone's mental health concerns on the basis of their own relative privilege, or even, like, their shitty attitude about it or whatever.
So why was ThoughtSlime and everybody else saying, oh, boo-hoo, in response to the statistics about male virginity? Like, the response is always, who cares? Like, why do men need to have sex, is, like, their response. And it's like, because sex is fun and, like, kind of a part of the human experience. Like, you're not owed it from any specific person, but, like, the fact that so many people are not getting it when they were before seems like maybe a thing's going on. So incels love this statistic because when you see that women and the rate of virginity has stagnated, like, women are not seeing anywhere close to the massive spike we've seen since 2008 in male virginity. There's been a particular spike in the last couple years. And this is just 2018. This is pre-pandemic, guys. This is pre-pandemic. This is from a recent article this year. Like, the Washington Post made this article this year, but the survey and the stats are from 2018. This is pre-pandemic. It's gotten worse. This is from before the rise of Andrew Tate, guys. This stat is from before the rise of Andrew Tate by multiple years. Yeah. Women, the rate of virginity for women has plateaued and basically zigzagged around this general margin for quite some time. For men, it's just been going up exponentially since 2010. Like, this is exponential growth. That's what you're seeing here. Like, pretty damn close to exponential. Not exactly. It's gradual, but it's like, it gets pretty damn steep in some areas. This level of a spike and this 10% difference is massive. My mom said they need to cut off their man buns, which I think is a good example of what I mean, right? Like, when women hear this statistic, they're like, who cares? Boo-hoo, right? And meanwhile, we're seeing, like, this massive rise in, like, male school shootings, like, on women violence. We're seeing massive rises in, like, there you go, right? So, like, it's a good example. Like, a lot of women, like, they hear that, and a lot of people on the left hear about that, and they just don't give a fuck. They're like, good.
Even if someone is, like, a sexist jerk, like, their mental health problems are important. Mental health does not discriminate in this way. Even mean, shitty people deserve to have their mental health treated and taken seriously. That being said, it does kind of seem to me like Shoe is suggesting that discussions of patriarchy and privilege are the thing which makes men depressed and lonely, or, at the very least, the thing which prevents feminists and leftists from addressing the issue, that men feel undervalued and attacked, specifically because of efforts to dismantle these privileges. Towards the end of her video, for example, she says that men are natural providers, and that their inability to provide makes them feel valueless.
A lot of men's value comes from the money they make, unfortunately. Men are natural providers, and if they have nobody to provide for, they get into findom or send random girls on the internet money. I'm just kidding, but the fact is, a lot of men simply feel like they don't have a purpose anymore. Whether a job
This is basically the, like, most nothing argument ever. I don't feel like it's really the men feel like they don't have a purpose anymore thing, because this, like, hyper specializes the argument. Nobody in the working class feels like they have a purpose anymore. This is not a uniquely male issue. It's why I'm so pissed off when right-wingers and red pillars talk about this stuff, because they miss the mark by a lot. They try to blame they try to find they try to blame women through popular culture, if that makes sense. And I don't think that's the way to go about it. I also don't think that pointing to non-unique issues is good. There is something that is clearly unique to men that's causing the male loneliness issue, because we're not seeing anything close to that represented in women.
Or career that's fulfilling and pays well, or a woman or family to protect and take care of and provide for.
And like, it does strike me.
And I will also say that statistic that we were looking at also lends here. Let me bring it back up. This statistic also tells us something pretty important about the way incels think and the way they interpret this data. If 28% of men aren't having sex at around this age demographic, and only 18% of women in that age demographic are not having sex, that means that while the group of men who are sexually active is shrinking, the amount of women who are sexually active with that shrinking group of men is not shrinking. This means that the sexually active group of men, while it is shrinking, at least this is how incels will interpret it, while the sexually active group of men is shrinking, the amount of women those men are getting is not. So they see it as like dating shrink, like dating inflation, I guess is the way to describe it. They see it as like basically the real life trend being represented as what we see on the dating apps. Now, obviously, that isn't exactly a correct interpretation of the data, because that data tracks the sexual activity of women and men in a specific demographic, like in a specific age demographic. So when you account for older men and older women and like whatnot, then you're very quickly going to figure out, well, okay, maybe that's not the case as much as you would think. But technically, as an effect, it is true that we are seeing the pool of sexually active men shrink while the pool of sexually active women does not. And that really feeds into the incel worldview of like the Chads get nonstop like sex with women, and the incels, us normal guys can't get a girl. And of course it's bullshit, because most of this stuff is literally all in their heads. But if a massive group of people, a massive demographic of people, all have something up with them in their head that is making them think like this, we got to acknowledge it.
As disingenuous to at once say that men feel undervalued because they're unable to be providers, which is obviously true and a serious problem, and then go on to say that men are natural providers, a phrase which insists that men are correct, that their value is based on how well they provide for others.
This is a good argument from ThoughtSlime here.
Suggests that if a man's partner or family does not require him to provide for them, they are somehow robbing him of his natural position. This is, in my view, rather ironically, precisely the type of gender essentialism that creates the loneliness and depression she is ostensibly so concerned with. The idea of men just being naturally the providers is the justifying logic of patriarchy.
Actually, a good argument from ThoughtSlime.
Of course, it's not that non-men have been forbidden from or kept out of positions where they could provide for themselves. It's simply that men are, by nature of being men, naturally seeking out those positions and do them better because of their natural provider vibes. You see this logic applied each and every time some dickhead claims the wage gap doesn't exist and that women simply choose jobs which pay less. No thought is given as to why women choose those positions or why those positions are paid less. That's just what women do naturally, because
it feels like these lefty video essayist YouTubers, like their takes stopped being based post 2018. Or like post 2018. Oh, my light's timed out. Hold on a second, guys. Oh. Hold on. I gotta do this until both of them turn on. Come on. I hate that one controller controls both things, but like in the worst way. Come on. Come on. Like, maybe if I do it like this? Like, if I hide the signal from the other light? Oh, there we go. There we go. Nice. Boomer Zan? No, I'm not a boomer. It's just these lights are finicky, okay? These lights are real finicky. It feels as though, like, these lefty breadtube video essayist types, like their takes got frozen at 2018. The takes they were having back then, the videos they were making back then, based as fuck. But then from that point on, it was extremely hit and miss. So when it's like repeating a talking point that they had back then, like this one about how like these standards are what are making men lonely and everything, completely correct, completely fine. But when it comes to more like current culture war topics and responding to the right on them, they completely go off base. It's like whenever they say something they would have said back then, they go back to being their old selves for a moment, but then they go straight back to being their current selves. All right, I'm less interested in this now, so let's see what's going on later on.
To that reasoning. You can see that, for example, when she brings up women being more likely to go to post-secondary education, as though that implies men are, if anything, actually economically disadvantaged, that we have overcorrected, and now men are the ones being held back. But like, those figures change a lot when you compare graduation rates for fields that are more likely to make lots and lots of money. At one point, she talks about how the Tumblr feminists she was mocking back in the day
Yeah, Shoe0nHead's like anti-wage gap stuff has always been stupid.
are now transphobes, and thus, we all should have cut her some slack back then.
90% of all homicides recorded worldwide were committed by male perpetrators. We should just get rid of all males, to be honest. This includes trans women, as they still retain male violence. By the way, you know the Tumblr feminists who were like, all men are sexist and rapists, male tears, penises are evil, blah 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 back in the day? Well, this is them now. Should've just let me cook back then.
I think there are a few problems with what she's saying here. I think that there are, for example, a lot of valid criticisms of Tumblr-style pop feminists.
Dude, it's so weird. It's so weird when she virtue signals about how, like, some women online are misandrist and hate men so much it makes them transphobic. But then, at the same time, she is literally married to a guy who was so uncomfortable with discussions of people that were in the group, in Shoe0nHead's group chat, with them discussing, like, gay marriage because there was a lesbian couple in there, that they had to ban the discussion of that topic as not to offend Shoe0nHead's at the time boyfriend, now husband, because he's that, like, offended by gay people and like, trans people and stuff. It's crazy to see her virtue signal, like, against transphobia. It's crazy.
And I think chief among those criticisms is a culture of toxic performative inclusion, where people climb over one another to tick more diversity boxes rather than meaningfully examine the power dynamics between different types of people in any sincere way. And of course, no doubt some Tumblr-style hyper-online feminist keyboard warriors have grown turfy in old age.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can't hear ThoughtSlime of all people use that as, like, a pejorative when that is ThoughtSlime. I can't. Like, ThoughtSlime can't describe themselves and then use it as a pejorative without any self-awareness whatsoever and expect me to keep with it. I can't. I can't do it. I can't take any more. They're both so insufferable. They're both so insufferable. I hope you guys enjoyed my suffering as I watched two people that I really don't like fight. It was a little fun, but it was more miserable.